ones, but they had to. And so Jesus was saying, you know those people that you don't like? Those in position? You know that those so-called rulers? This is what they do. They exercise authority over their people. They try to make their power and authority bear upon the people. You know that these so-called rulers of the Gentiles seek power and glory for themselves. What? In order to tyrannize and dominate their subjects. That is the way of worldly people who desire worldly authority. That should not be so among you. They spend all their energies to get to the top. And once having reached the peak, they cause all others to feel the weight of their authority. Now, perhaps none of you here are in government, but I'm sure there are some of you here who are in positions of authority. How often do you allow your authority, your position, to bear upon the people? How often do you rub it to their face and say, "Ha, I'm better"? And you could just hear Jesus here saying, you know that about the Gentile rulers, don't you? You feel it too, don't you? And you hate that about their rule, right? And then the clincher, well, you know, that is exactly how you're acting when you scrabble among yourselves about who is the greatest. Jesus was instructing his disciples that the kingdom he brings is like none other. It is run differently from the worldly kingdoms. Its values are seen in love, selflessness, service, not fame, not power, not authority. The way of the world is not the way it should be with his followers. It shouldn't be like that with the 12. And it is not the way it should be with us as well. In verses 43 and 44, Jesus tells the disciples that such manner of selfish, worldly ambition is not to characterize them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be the slave of all. Jesus is saying that the kingdom over which he reigns, in the kingdom over which he reigns, greatness is obtained by pursuing a course of action which is the exact opposite of what is followed in the unbelieving world. Greatness consists in self-giving and the outpouring of the self in service to others for the glory of God. In short, to be great means to love. It's never easy to love. It's never easy to regard other people better than ourselves, to think more highly than of them than we do of ourselves. But that's it. To be great in the kingdom means to love, to serve. Here Jesus expands on what he had twice taught his disciples about the relation of greatness with service in this gospel. In chapter 9, he says, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. And again, just a few verses earlier, he says, but many who are first will be last, and the last first. Now, the word servant and slave, although different in Greek, the word servant being diakonos, where we get the word deacon, and slave, doulos, where we get that ship. Although different in Greek, are used here synonymously, just as the words first and great are meant to parallel each other. The point that Jesus was trying to make was that the way to glory in his kingdom was through the path of selfless humility and loving service towards others. But how exactly does this selfless humility and loving service towards others look like? What exactly does it mean to seek greatness and prominence by being a slave or servant of all. In order that the disciples, as well as we, may understand clearly what Jesus meant, he puts himself forward, both as the example and the motivation for our kingdom life. He says, referring to himself, in one of my most loved verses, in verse 45, he says, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus Christ, their leader and master, the one Peter acknowledged to be the Christ, the Son of the living God, our Redeemer, our King, the second person of the Godhead. Even he says, came not to be served, but to serve. The word even here is the operative word, even. Very important. Because the Lord meant to distinguish himself as one who in fact deserved to be served. One who was worthy of service and honor. Yet, he did not come for any of that. He did not come for the approval of men, nor did he come as a worldly ruler, demanding homage and allegiance. No, even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. The disciples, they should have known this well. For the past 3 years, they saw and followed him as he went around Palestine, healing the sick, preaching the good news of the kingdom to those who were weak and oppressed. The Lord Jesus has exemplified it to them. You want to know how to live in the kingdom? Look at me. This is the kingdom way. 3 years, I've shown you how to live it. Yet his statements do not end with this. He continues by asserting that he also came for one other thing, not just to be an example. He came to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, I don't need to tell you what a ransom is. We live in the Philippines. We're very much aware of what a ransom is. It is the price paid to set captives free, whether slaves or prisoners of war or kidnapped victims. The ransom was what redeemed them and granted them liberty. This, Jesus says, is what he had come to accomplish. He was to give his life as a ransom, as a payment in place of the many. Jesus had come to save a people for himself. And the way that he intended to do this was to give his life as a payment in exchange for the release of his people from their bondage to sin and death. Clearly, what he meant by this last statement was to point his disciples again to the cross, to point us again to the cross. That was where their present journey was leading them, to Jerusalem, where he would be delivered over to the chief priests and the scribes, who will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles. And the Gentiles, in turn, will mock him and spit on him and flog him